Welcome to your storytelling. Enjoy the stories, and don't forget to subscribe. When his phone broke, he handed it to me casually, saying, "Just throw it away. It's useless now." He didn't even glance at it, like it was nothing more than an old receipt. But something about the way he said it stuck with me. The way he didn't even look at the phone, as if he couldn't bear to. I held it in my hand, feeling its weight. Not heavy, but somehow it felt loaded. A cracked screen, a lifeless black display, just an old phone, right? But curiosity has a way of creeping in when you least expect it. That night, after he went to bed, I found myself staring at it on the counter. My fingers reached for it before I could stop myself. Why do I care? I told myself, but I knew why. It wasn't about the phone. It was about the feeling in my gut. That nagging whisper that said, something isn't right. I found an old charger buried in a drawer, plugged it in, and waited. As the screen flickered to life, my heart started to race. The screen lit up, casting a faint glow in the dark kitchen. My heart thudded louder than the quiet hum of the charger. I told myself it was harmless, just a quick peek, nothing more. After all, I was his wife. What secrets could there possibly be? I swiped past the lock screen. No passcode. That alone felt strange. He always had a password on his new phone, but this old one? Wide open, like it was waiting for me. I clicked on the messages first, scrolling through conversations with friends, work chats, all innocent. My pulse began to settle, and I felt silly for being suspicious. Until I saw it. A contact saved as just the letter L. No full name, just an initial. My finger hovered over the thread, hesitation battling with curiosity. Don't be dramatic, I thought, but I tapped it anyway. And there it was, the first message I saw. I miss you already. Simple. But those 4 words hit me like a punch to the chest. I miss you already. My eyes locked on that message. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. My brain scrambled to rationalize. Maybe it was an old friend, a family member? But deep down, I knew. I scrolled, and each message felt like a dagger. Last night was perfect. I can still feel your touch. Touch? My stomach twisted. My hands trembled as I read more. Photos. Smiling selfies. Not our selfies, theirs. Him with a woman I'd never seen before. His arm around her, his face pressed to hers, his smile wide and genuine. A smile I hadn't seen in a long time. My throat tightened. I clicked on another photo, him kissing her, eyes closed, lost in the moment. I felt like I was intruding on something sacred, except it wasn't sacred. It was betrayal, raw and real. A message from her. When will you tell her? Tell me what? That my marriage was a lie? That I was the fool who never saw it coming? I couldn't stop scrolling, even though each message chipped away at my heart. I hate hiding us, she'd written. I want to wake up next to you, not sneak around. My fingers were ice cold, but my skin burned with rage and humiliation. He told her he loved her, over and over, in ways he hadn't told me in years. He called her beautiful, sexy, funny, all the words I used to hear when we first met. I searched for clues. When did it start? Messages dated back years. I thought about the work trips, the late nights at the office, the weekends he suddenly had plans. It all made sense now. I was living in a carefully crafted illusion, and I never questioned it. I remembered the times I'd kissed him goodbye, clueless. The anniversaries we celebrated while he was texting her under the table. I felt like a stranger in my own life. Who was I married to? And who was this woman who stole him from me? I sat there, staring at the screen, my heart a tangled mess of anger, sadness, and disbelief. But above all, I needed answers. I couldn't confront him yet. I wasn't ready. I needed to know everything first. I scrolled through more messages, searching for hints about who she was. A photo of her face. She was younger than me. Pretty. Effortlessly so. Long dark hair, perfect smile, the kind of woman who didn't have to try too hard. Was she everything I wasn't anymore? I found her number saved under that single, mocking letter. L. My hands shook as I opened a new message. What are you doing? I asked myself, but I couldn't stop. I typed, "Who are you?" and hit send before I could change my mind. My heart raced as the 3 little dots appeared. She was typing. Then they disappeared. Then reappeared. Finally, a reply. You already know? My blood ran cold. She was right. I did know. I just didn't want to believe it. I stared at her reply. You already know. My hands trembled as I gripped the phone tighter, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear my own thoughts. She didn't even deny it. No hesitation, no confusion, just certainty. It was like she knew I'd eventually find out. I typed again, my fingers moving before my mind could catch up. Do you know about me? I held my breath, waiting. The dots appeared almost instantly. Yes, I always have. Those words hit harder than I expected. She knew about me. She knew he was married, knew I existed, and it didn't stop her. My stomach twisted into knots. How could she be okay with this? I thought about all the nights I'd spent alone, believing he was working late, while she was probably wrapped in his arms. I wanted to scream, cry, throw the phone, but instead, I just stared at her message, feeling the weight of betrayal from both of them. I couldn't stop myself. My fingers hovered over the screen, my breath shaky. I needed to understand. Why? That simple question echoed in my mind. I typed it out. Then why? Why be with him knowing he's married? I hit send, my chest tightening with every second that passed. The dots appeared again. She was quick to reply, as if she'd been waiting for this confrontation. Because I love him, she wrote. Simple, blunt, cruel. Love? Wasn't I the one he vowed to love forever? My throat felt dry. How easily she claimed something that wasn't hers to begin with. Did he say those words back to her? Did he tell her the same lies he told me, the ones wrapped in forever and only you? I stared at her message, the word love taunting me. Is that all it took to justify it? My heart felt like it was collapsing under the weight of her honesty. I wanted to ask more, but what could I possibly hear that would make this hurt less? I swallowed the lump in my throat and typed again, my fingers trembling. Did he ever promise you more? I needed to know. I needed to understand if I was just a placeholder in his life, a role he played while his heart belonged elsewhere. The dots appeared almost instantly. She was eager, as if this conversation was cathartic for her. He promised me everything, she replied. Everything. That word cut deeper than the rest. I read it over and over. He promised her everything. But what did that mean? A future? Marriage? A life without me? My mind raced with images of them planning, laughing, maybe even imagining a life together while I was at home, cooking his favorite meals, folding his laundry, loving him with every piece of me. Was I ever enough? The question haunted me. I stared at the phone, wondering how many promises he had whispered to her in the dark. Promises that belonged to me once. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in bed beside him, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, wondering how he could sleep so peacefully while my world was shattering. I turned my back to him, my eyes wide open, staring into the darkness. Who are you? I wanted to whisper, because the man beside me, the man I thought I knew, felt like a stranger. Every laugh, every kiss, every moment we'd shared felt tainted now. I thought about the nights he'd come home late, smelling faintly of cologne, saying he had just one more meeting. How many lies had I swallowed without question? I remembered the warmth in his eyes when he'd say, I love you. Was that real or just another performance? My heart ached with betrayal, but beneath the pain was something worse, doubt. Doubt about every memory, every smile, every touch. I didn't know which was worse, his affair or the fact that I no longer recognized the man I'd married. By morning, my mind was a battlefield of questions and emotions. I watched him get ready for work, tying his tie with practiced ease, unaware that I knew everything. Anything interesting happened today? He asked, sipping his coffee like it was any other day. My heart raced. Oh, you have no idea. I forced a smile, my face betraying none of the storm inside. Actually, yes, I said, my voice steady. Your old phone still works. His hand froze mid-sip. Just like that, I had my answer. His eyes darted to me, panic flickering for a split second before he masked it with a tight smile. Oh, that old thing, he laughed nervously. Nothing important on there. But his voice was too light, too rehearsed. My heart thundered. I'd given him a chance to come clean, and he chose to lie again. That was the breaking point. Not the affair, not the messages, but the fact that even when caught, he still couldn't tell me the truth. After that morning, something shifted between us. The air felt heavier, thick with unspoken words. We went through the motions, breakfast, goodbye kisses, casual texts throughout the day, but underneath, there was a crack in the foundation. I watched him closely, studying every expression, every hesitation. Was this the face of a man hiding a double life? At night, the silence grew louder. We lay side by side, but it felt like a canyon separated us. I wondered if he could feel it too, or if he was just that good at pretending. Sometimes, I'd catch him staring at his new phone, his thumb hovering like he wanted to send a message but thought better of it. Was he texting her? Did he miss her? The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the loneliness that followed. I was alone in my marriage, trapped between the woman I used to be and the woman who knew too much. And he was a stranger sleeping beside me. I knew I couldn't live in limbo, drowning in questions and silence. I needed more proof, more truth, more everything. So, I made a plan. I wasn't going to confront him without knowing the full story. I wanted to catch him off guard, the way he had blindsided me. I started small, checking his schedule, noticing patterns. He was predictable, which made it easier. Thursday nights were late meetings. Saturday mornings? Gym time. But his gym bag always looked suspiciously light. I decided to follow him. It felt ridiculous at first, like something out of a bad detective movie, but desperation makes you bold. I told him I had plans with friends, kissed him goodbye, then waited until he left. My heart raced as I trailed him in my car, keeping a safe distance. He didn't go to the office. He didn't go to the gym. He drove across town to an apartment complex I'd never seen before. And that's when I knew she was there. I parked a few cars back, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I watched him get out, casually locking his car like it was just another day. He didn't even glance around. So confident, so unaware that his lies were unraveling behind him. I saw him buzz into the building, disappearing through the glass doors. My heart pounded in my chest. What now? Part of me wanted to march up there, bang on the door, and scream the truth into both their faces. But I didn't. Not yet. I needed more. I waited in my car for what felt like hours, watching shadows move behind curtains, cars coming and going, my mind spinning with every scenario. Finally, he came out. But he wasn't alone. She was with him. I saw her face, the same face from the photos. She laughed at something he said, touching his arm like it was the most natural thing in the world. And he smiled at her the way he hadn't smiled at me in years. I didn't plan to confront her that day, but something inside me snapped. I got out of the car, my heart racing, and walked straight toward them. He saw me first, his smile fading, his face going pale. "What are you doing here?" he stammered, like I was the one intruding. She turned to look at me, her expression curious, then wary. "I could ask you the same," I replied, my voice surprisingly calm. The three of us stood there, an awkward triangle of betrayal. He fumbled for words, but I wasn't interested in his excuses. I looked directly at her. "You knew about me. So why?" She didn't flinch. "Because he loves me," she said, her voice steady. My chest tightened. No shame, no apology, just the truth as she saw it. I turned to him. "Is that true?" His silence was louder than any confession. That was my answer. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just walked away, leaving them both standing there, tangled in the mess they'd created. The drive home was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel, my mind replaying every word, every look. I thought I'd feel relief, having confronted them both, but all I felt was emptiness. When I walked into the house, it felt different, colder, emptier, like the walls themselves knew the truth. I sat on the couch, staring at nothing, letting the weight of it all settle over me. He came home hours later, quietly slipping through the door like a shadow. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, his keys dangling from his hand. "Are you going to say anything?" I finally asked, my voice hollow. He sighed, sat across from me, and for the first time, didn't try to lie. I didn't mean for it to happen, he whispered. But that didn't matter. It happened. The lies, the betrayal, the years spent living beside a stranger. I realized then that no explanation could ever undo what was done. Some truths are too heavy to carry. He sat there, staring at the floor, his words barely above a whisper. I'm sorry, he said, finally meeting my eyes. But sorry felt too small, too fragile to carry the weight of what he'd done. An apology wasn't going to erase the images burned into my mind. The texts, the photos, the way he smiled at her. I wanted to scream. Sorry for what? For lying? For cheating? For thinking I was too blind to notice? But I didn't. Instead, I asked, how long? His jaw clenched, and that hesitation was another betrayal. A year, he admitted. A year. An entire year of my life spent loving a man who gave his heart to someone else. I didn't cry. My tears had dried up somewhere between the apartment and the front door. Why didn't you just leave me? I asked quietly. His answer was another dagger to the chest. Because I still love you. But if this was love, then what did hate look like? His words echoed in my mind long after he said them. I still love you. What did that even mean? Love isn't supposed to look like this. Like lies hidden in old phones, like secret apartments across town. Love isn't supposed to break you into pieces and expect you to put yourself back together. I watched him, trying to find the man I married in his face, but all I saw were broken promises. You can't love someone and hurt them like this, I whispered. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, running his hands through his hair. I didn't mean to hurt you. That was the thing. He didn't have to mean it. He did it anyway. I stood up, my legs shaky but determined. I don't care what you meant to do. I care about what you did. He reached for me, but I stepped back. His touch used to feel like home. Now, it felt like a stranger's hand. And maybe that's what he was now, a stranger with my husband's face. Days passed, but the distance between us grew wider with every silent meal, every forced conversation. We moved around the house like ghosts, haunting the memories of what used to be. I'd catch him looking at me when he thought I wasn't watching, his eyes filled with something. Regret? Maybe. But regret wasn't enough. Regret didn't change the fact that he'd chosen her over and over again for an entire year. I found myself wondering who he was texting when his phone buzzed. Was it her? Was he apologizing to her now, too? The paranoia was a slow poison, seeping into every part of my day. I hated that I still cared, that his actions still had the power to ruin my mood, to steal my peace. At night, we slept in the same bed, our backs turned to each other, an ocean of betrayal between us. I used to find comfort in the rhythm of his breathing. Now, it just reminded me of all the nights he'd spent breathing beside someone else. I woke up one morning with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. I couldn't live like this, trapped in a marriage held together by nothing but habit and history. I deserved more. I deserved honesty, respect, peace. I watched him as he got ready for work, his movements mechanical, like he was just as exhausted by the weight of our brokenness as I was. We need to talk, I said, my voice steady. He froze, then nodded, sitting on the edge of the bed. I took a deep breath. I can't do this anymore. His face crumpled, but I didn't flinch. I'd cried enough for both of us. I'm not angry, I continued. I'm just done. He tried to protest, to explain, to apologize again, but none of it mattered. Love isn't supposed to feel like a battle you're losing every day. I packed a bag that afternoon, not because I was running away, but because I was finally choosing me. Walking out the door was harder than I expected. This house held memories, good ones too. Laughter echoing in the hallways, lazy Sunday mornings, whispered secrets under warm blankets. But now, all those memories felt tainted, like a beautiful picture smeared with dirt. He stood in the doorway, watching me with glassy eyes. Please don't go, he whispered. But it was too late. He'd already let me go the moment he chose her. I didn't respond. Words felt useless, like trying to put out a wildfire with a cup of water. I stepped outside, feeling the cool air hit my face like a slap of reality. This was it, the end of us. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. He was still standing there, small and distant. A man who had everything and lost it because he didn't know how to keep it. I didn't cry. Not this time. Because leaving wasn't the sad part. Staying would have been. The first night alone was quieter than I expected. No footsteps in the hallway. No familiar voice calling out, "Did you lock the door?" Just me and the echo of my own thoughts. I checked my phone out of habit, expecting a text from him, but there was nothing. The silence was deafening. I sat on the edge of the unfamiliar bed in the small apartment I'd rented, staring at the suitcase I hadn't fully unpacked. It didn't feel real yet. I thought about texting him, just to see if he'd respond, but I stopped myself. What would I even say? I missed him, but not the version of him that betrayed me. I missed the man I thought he was, the man who didn't exist anymore. I laid down, staring at the ceiling, letting the emptiness sink in. It wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the end of the life I thought I had. But somewhere beneath the sadness was a fragile, flickering hope. Maybe this was the beginning of something better. Over the next few days, I typed out dozens of messages to him, but I never hit send. Why did you do it? Did you ever love me? Do you miss me? I stared at the blinking cursor, waiting for the words to feel right, but they never did. What was the point of asking questions when I already knew the answers wouldn't heal me? Each unsent message became a small victory, proof that I didn't need his words to find closure. Still, I couldn't help but wonder if he was thinking about me. Was he with her now? Did he feel the emptiness too? Or was he already filling it with someone else's laughter? I hated that I cared. I hated that even after everything, my heart still had room for him. But healing isn't a straight line. It's messy and complicated. Some days, I felt strong. Other days, I found myself staring at my phone, wishing for a message that would never come. One evening, just as I was settling into my new routine of pretending I was okay, my phone rang. His name flashed on the screen, and for a moment, I froze. My heart raced, not with excitement, but with the familiar ache of unfinished business. I almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity won. "Hello?" I answered, my voice colder than I intended. There was a pause on the other end, then his voice, soft and hesitant. "I just wanted to hear your voice." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Hear my voice? After everything? I stayed silent, letting him fill the emptiness with apologies and half-baked explanations. "I miss you," he whispered. Those 3 words used to mean everything. Now, they meant nothing. "You missed the idea of me," I replied. "But you didn't miss me enough to stay loyal." He didn't argue because he knew I was right. I hung up before he could say more. Not out of anger, but because I finally realized I deserved better than words. After that call, something shifted inside me. I stopped checking my phone, stopped wondering if he'd reach out again. I started focusing on myself, not the broken version, but the woman I used to be before I lost myself in someone else's shadow. I took long walks, breathed in fresh air, and let the silence heal me instead of haunt me. I even signed up for a pottery class, something I'd always wanted to do but never did because he thought it was silly. Sitting at that wheel, shaping something with my own hands, felt symbolic. I was molding a new version of myself, one that didn't revolve around someone else's validation. The clay was messy, imperfect, but beautiful in its own way. Just like me, I realized healing isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering who you were before the hurt and falling in love with that person all over again. Months passed. Life started to feel normal again. Not the old normal, but a new version I was learning to embrace. One day, while grabbing coffee, I saw him. He was across the street, holding hands with her. For a brief moment, our eyes met. My heart didn't race. My breath didn't catch. Instead, I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness. Just a quiet acknowledgement that we were 2 people with a shared past but no future. He gave me a hesitant smile, as if asking for forgiveness without words. I nodded slightly, not for him, but for me. Forgiveness isn't about excusing what someone did. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of their choices. As I walked away, I realized something powerful. I wasn't the woman who discovered secrets hidden in an old phone anymore. I was the woman who survived them. One weekend, while organizing my new apartment, I found an old box tucked away in the closet. It was filled with photos, letters, and souvenirs from our life together. Ticket stubs from vacations, handwritten notes, and even the dried flowers he'd once given me. I sat on the floor, holding each item, feeling waves of emotions I thought I'd buried. Some memories were beautiful, others bittersweet, but all of them reminded me of a time when I believed in the illusion. I thought about throwing it all away, erasing every trace of him, but then I paused. Those memories were real, even if he wasn't who I thought he was. They were part of my story. I didn't need to erase them to move on. I just needed to accept them. So, I packed the box neatly, taped it shut, and placed it in the back of the closet. Not as a shrine to the past, but as a chapter I'd closed. Weeks later, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Curiosity got the best of me, and I answered. It was her, the woman from the photos, the texts, the betrayal. Her voice was soft, almost apologetic. "I thought you deserved to know the truth," she began. I felt a surge of emotions, anger, confusion, but mostly curiosity. She told me things I didn't expect. It hadn't been a fairy tale romance like I'd imagined. He'd lied to her too, weaving stories about me, claiming our marriage was over long before it was. She didn't call to gloat. She called because she'd been deceived too. I hung up, not sure how to feel. I realized he wasn't just a liar to me. He was a liar to everyone. And somehow, that made it easier. It wasn't about me not being enough. It was about him never being honest with anyone, not even himself. That night, I wrote him a letter. Not to send, but to get the words out of my system. I poured everything onto the page. My heartbreak, my anger, my disappointment. I wrote about the nights I cried, the days I questioned my worth, and the way his betrayal had shattered something inside me. But as I wrote, something unexpected happened. The words shifted from bitterness to gratitude. "Thank you for showing me who you really are. Thank you for freeing me from a life built on lies. Thank you for teaching me that I deserve better." When I finished, I didn't feel the urge to send it. The letter wasn't for him. It was for me. I folded it neatly, placed it in a drawer, and felt lighter. Sometimes, closure isn't about confrontation. It's about saying what you need to say, even if the only person who hears it is you. Months turned into a year. Life didn't just move on. I did. I found joy in small things again. Morning coffee, sunsets, new friendships. I laughed more, worried less, and stopped looking over my shoulder for the ghost of my past. One day, while walking in the park, I realized I hadn't thought about him in weeks. His memory no longer felt like an open wound but a faint scar, a reminder of a lesson learned. I wasn't broken anymore. I was whole, not because he came back, not because I found someone new, but because I found myself. I never thought I'd reach this place, but here I was, standing in the sunshine, breathing in peace, and realizing that the worst thing that happened to me had led me to the best version of myself. Out of the blue, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address, just my name in familiar handwriting. Inside was a letter from him. It wasn't filled with excuses or apologies. It was simple. "I hope you're happy. I'm sorry I wasn't the man you deserved." I read it once, folded it back, and smiled. Not because I forgave him, but because I no longer needed his words to validate my healing. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. I walked to the beach that evening, letting the wind carry away the last traces of him from my heart. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I whispered a final goodbye, not to him, but to the version of me that thought I needed him to be whole. I was free, and that was the real ending to our story. Starting over wasn't as dramatic as I thought it would be. There was no grand revelation or cinematic moment where everything suddenly made sense. It was quieter than that. It was in the mornings when I woke up and realized I no longer felt the heaviness in my chest. It was in the simple routines, buying fresh flowers for myself, trying new recipes, and laughing at shows I'd never have watched when I was with him. I wasn't rebuilding my life. I was creating an entirely new one where I didn't have to shrink myself to fit someone else's expectations. There was a strange beauty in starting from scratch. No more pretending, no more compromises. Just me, raw and real. I wasn't defined by what had happened to me. I was defined by how I rose from it. And for the first time in a long time, I felt proud of who I was becoming. One afternoon, I was sitting in a cozy cafe, lost in a book, when a stranger asked if he could share my table. The cafe was crowded, so I nodded. We exchanged polite smiles, nothing more. But as the minutes passed, we began to talk. Not about deep things, just little conversations about coffee preferences and favorite books. There was no pressure, no hidden agenda, just two people sharing a space. His laugh was genuine, his eyes kind. For the first time, I realized I could connect with someone without the shadow of my past looming over me. I didn't compare him to my ex or wonder about hidden secrets. He was just him, and I was just me. When he asked for my number, I hesitated, not out of fear, but out of respect for the new boundaries I'd created for myself. I gave him my number, not because I needed someone, but because I wanted to. Trust isn't something that magically reappears after heartbreak. It's fragile, like glass that's been shattered and carefully glued back together. Every day, I tested the waters of vulnerability, letting small pieces of myself be seen. I met the stranger from the cafe again. His name was Alex. We went for walks, had long conversations, and slowly, I felt parts of myself opening up. I was honest about my past. Not the whole dramatic story, but enough to show him where my scars were. He listened without judgment, never trying to fix me, just accepting me as I was. That was new. Trust wasn't about believing someone would never hurt me again. It was about believing that even if they did, I'd survive. My worth wasn't tied to someone's loyalty anymore. I could love without losing myself. That realization was the foundation of everything I was rebuilding. One evening, I sat down and wrote a letter. Not to my ex, but to the woman I used to be. Dear me, I'm sorry you went through that pain. I'm sorry you believed you weren't enough. But look at you now. You survived. You're stronger than you think. You found your voice, your joy, your peace. Thank you for not giving up when it felt like the world was crumbling. Thank you for believing in love, even when it hurt. You deserved better, and now you're giving it to yourself. As I sealed the letter, tears filled my eyes, not from sadness, but from pride. I wasn't mourning my past anymore. I was honoring it. Every heartbreak, every betrayal, had shaped me into someone I genuinely liked. And that was the greatest victory of all. Months later, I ran into my ex again. It wasn't planned. We were both at the same grocery store, standing in line. Our eyes met, and for a brief second, I saw a flicker of something in his gaze. Regret? Maybe? But it didn't matter. He smiled awkwardly, as if unsure whether to speak. I simply nodded politely and turned away. No anger. No pain. Just indifference. And that's when I realized I'd found closure. Not in dramatic confrontations or tearful goodbyes, but in the simple act of not caring anymore. I didn't need answers because I already had them. I didn't need apologies because I'd forgiven myself. Walking out of that store felt like walking out of the last shadow he'd ever cast over my life. I was free, not because he let me go, but because I chose to let go. It was a Thursday afternoon when I got the knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I hesitated before answering. To my surprise, it was his mother. My ex's mother. I hadn't seen her in months. She looked older, tired, and there was an unfamiliar sadness in her eyes. She asked if she could come in. We sat in the living room in uncomfortable silence for a moment before she spoke. I know you've moved on, she began, her voice trembling slightly, but I need you to know something about my son. I braced myself for whatever came next. I thought she would apologize, or maybe make excuses for him. But she didn't. Instead, she told me something I didn't expect. He was struggling. Not with guilt, but with the realization that he had lost something irreplaceable. She apologized for him, even though he didn't deserve it. And for the first time, I felt pity, not for myself, but for him. He was the one who had truly lost. The visit from his mother left me shaken. Not in the way I expected, but in a way that made me reflect. For the first time, I truly understood that he wasn't just a villain in my story. He was a broken man, acting out of fear, insecurity, and a desperate need for validation. I realized that no matter how badly he had hurt me, he couldn't take away the strength I had found within myself. I wasn't defined by his lies, nor by the mistakes I'd made in staying for so long. I had learned to survive, to grow, and to forgive, not for him, but for me. His actions didn't define my worth. I did. I was no longer the woman who let her happiness depend on someone else's approval. I was the woman who walked away, who built herself up from the ground, piece by piece, until I was whole again. That strength, that was what mattered. A few weeks later, I received a call. The number wasn't familiar, but the voice was unmistakable. It was him. My heart sank into my stomach. I almost didn't pick up, but something made me do it. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he began. I could hear the pain in his voice, the regret, and I almost felt sorry for him. But then he said something that caught me off guard. "I've realized that the life I had with you was the only real thing I ever had." There was silence on the other end. "I don't know what I was running from, but I've lost everything that mattered," he continued. My first instinct was to tell him off, to say everything I'd kept bottled up for months. But instead, I simply asked, "What do you want from me?" The pause on the line was heavy. "I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry," he said softly. And then, for the first time in a long time, I realized I didn't need his apology anymore. That phone call lingered in my mind for days. I replayed his words over and over, trying to decide how I felt about it. I didn't want to be bitter. I didn't want to hold on to anger forever. But I also didn't want to let him back into my life. He wasn't the person I thought he was, and I wasn't the same woman who would have accepted his apology without question. I had moved on, and I wasn't going back. I realized that forgiving him didn't mean allowing him back into my life. It meant setting him free. And in doing so, I was setting myself free. I had already done the hard work of healing. I didn't need him to complete me. I was already whole. So I put down the phone, took a deep breath, and let go of the last thread that connected me to the past. As the months passed, I settled into a kind of peace I never thought I'd find. My life was mine again, uncomplicated, quiet, and beautiful. I spent time with friends who supported me, with people who appreciated the real me, not the version I'd been when I was with him. I traveled. I learned new things. I fell in love with the world again, without feeling like I needed someone to validate my existence. And most importantly, I fell in love with myself. I didn't need a man to complete me. I didn't need a perfect relationship to prove my worth. I was enough, just as I was. One evening, I sat on the balcony, watching the sunset, and I realized I had found a kind of joy I hadn't known was possible. Not the kind that came from another person, but the kind that came from within. That was when I knew I was finally free. It was an ordinary day when life surprised me again. I was at a book fair, flipping through old novels, when I felt someone's gaze lingering. I looked up, and there he was, Alex. The stranger from the cafe I'd met months ago. The one who made me feel like myself again. We exchanged smiles, both clearly remembering the connection we'd shared. "Funny running into you here," he said with that warm, easy grin. We started talking as if no time had passed, and before I knew it, hours had slipped away. There was no awkwardness, just a natural flow, like picking up a conversation mid-sentence. This time, when he asked if I wanted to grab dinner, I didn't hesitate. It wasn't because I needed someone. It was because I wanted to share my time with someone who felt genuine. And that made all the difference. That dinner with Alex wasn't extravagant. No fancy restaurant, no candlelit table. We sat at a small outdoor cafe, with fairy lights strung above us and the hum of quiet conversations around. But it felt magical. We talked about everything. Our favorite books, childhood memories, dreams we tucked away. There was no pretense, no masks, just honesty. I found myself laughing in a way I hadn't in years, feeling lighter with every word. He listened. Not the polite, distracted kind of listening, but the kind where you know someone genuinely cares. As the night grew colder, he offered his jacket, and for a moment, I felt a warmth I thought I'd lost forever. It wasn't about falling for someone new. It was about realizing my heart had space to feel again, not out of desperation, but out of hope. After that night, something unexpected crept in, fear. Not fear of Alex, but fear of feeling happy. What if it was temporary? What if I was wrong again? I'd built walls to protect myself, and now, here was someone who made me want to tear them down. But vulnerability felt like a risk I wasn't sure I could afford. I caught myself overthinking texts, second-guessing his kindness, searching for hidden motives where there were none. It wasn't him I doubted, it was myself. Could I trust my instincts after everything I'd been through? One evening, I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. "You deserve to be happy," I whispered to myself. Not because someone else gave me permission, but because I did. Happiness isn't a guarantee, but neither is heartbreak. And I realized I'd rather take the chance than live in fear. As days turned into weeks, Alex became a part of my life in the most unexpected way, not as someone to fill a void, but as someone who added to the life I'd already built. Love, I realized, wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic confessions. It was in the small things. The way he remembered how I liked my coffee. The quiet text that simply said, "Thinking of you." The way he made space for me without trying to fix me. This love felt different, calm, steady, like a gentle tide instead of a crashing wave. And that's when it hit me. Love doesn't have to be complicated to be real. It doesn't have to hurt to be meaningful. It can be soft, kind, and simple. And that's exactly what I deserved. Not a love that consumed me, but one that nourished me. One rainy afternoon, I found myself writing a letter to my ex. Not because I wanted to reconnect, but because I needed to say the things I'd left unsaid. "You broke my heart in ways you'll never understand. But you also taught me something invaluable, that I am stronger than I ever knew. I don't hate you. I don't even resent you anymore. I just feel nothing. And that's the most freeing feeling of all." I never sent the letter. I didn't need to. Writing it was enough. It was like releasing the last remnants of bitterness that had clung to me like shadows. I folded the letter, tucked it into a drawer, and felt a weight lift off my chest. Closure doesn't always come from conversations or apologies. Sometimes, it comes from the quiet decision to let go. And in that moment, I was finally free. Not just from him, but from the version of myself that once believed I wasn't enough. It wasn't easy, moving on from the past. I spent years building my identity around someone who wasn't worthy of my time or love. But with every step I took toward healing, I felt a little more like myself again. A few months after Alex and I started spending more time together, we took a trip to the coast. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a weekend away to escape the chaos of life. But it felt like the first step into a new chapter. Sitting on the beach, watching the sunset together, I realized how far I'd come. The old wounds were still there, but they no longer defined me. I had learned to live again, to love again, and most importantly, to forgive myself. For the first time in years, I felt at peace with the person I had become, and with the person I was still becoming. The next few weeks were filled with the kind of joy I had almost forgotten existed. Then, something unexpected happened. Alex came over one evening with a box. "I know it's a little out of the blue, but I saw this, and I thought you'd like it," he said. I opened it to find an old, beautifully crafted journal. The kind that had a vintage feel, with a leather cover and thick, unmarked pages. "I've noticed you've started writing more lately," he added, his voice soft. "I thought this might help you keep track of your thoughts, your dreams. You know, the ones you haven't shared with anyone yet." I was speechless. It was the kind of gesture that was so simple, yet so thoughtful. I realized in that moment that he wasn't trying to fix me or complete me. He was just there. And that was more than enough. As I sat with the journal, I thought about how far I'd come. Trust had been a foreign concept to me for so long, especially after everything with my ex. But with Alex, it felt different. I wasn't afraid to let my guard down. For the first time in ages, I felt safe. Safe in his presence, safe in his words, safe in his love. But I also realized that trusting wasn't about expecting someone to be perfect. It was about understanding that we were both human, both capable of making mistakes, yet still willing to grow together. The difference now was that I wasn't holding on to past betrayals, past heartbreaks. I was learning to love without fear, without constantly looking for the catch. And that, in itself, was freeing. As time passed, life started getting busier for both Alex and me. He had a project that took him out of town for a few weeks, and I was wrapped up in work and personal goals. The distance felt strange at first, but as we navigated the separation, I realized that our connection didn't rely on physical proximity. We stayed in touch, of course, with texts and phone calls, but I didn't feel the panic or desperation that came from past relationships. I had learned the difference between needing someone and wanting someone. It wasn't about filling an empty space in my life. It was about choosing to share my life with someone who added to it, not completed it. When Alex returned, it was as if no time had passed. We fell into our rhythm effortlessly, and I knew this relationship was something different, something real. One evening, I sat on my balcony, looking at the city lights stretching before me. A sense of peace washed over me, and I thought about everything I had been through, the pain, the betrayal, the heartache. But most importantly, I thought about how much I had grown. I had rebuilt myself, piece by piece, and now I was whole. Not because of Alex, not because of anyone else, but because I had finally learned to love myself. I smiled to myself as I thought back on the journey. It wasn't always easy, but it had led me here, to a place of strength, independence, and peace. I didn't need anyone else's validation. I didn't need apologies. All I needed was me. And in that moment, I realized something. The best love story I'd ever experienced was the one I'd written for myself.